All right, hello, and welcome to part two of this training where we're talking about OCD recovery. And so, in part one, I talked about this idea of what OCD is, and in this particular training, I want to talk about this idea of what it means. Or what recovery of OCD really means, right? And that question comes in various forms to me. Is like, oh, is it possible to recover? I heard OCD is chronic, so I want to talk about this idea of just recovery. And so when I talk about OCD recovery, the best way I can explain it is really learning how to step out of the lens of OCD and staying out of the lens, right? So in part one, I talked about this idea of OCD being this kind of lens that comes over your eyes and kind of perception, so to speak. And, recovery is really about stepping out of that and seeing the thoughts and fears for what they are, which is just nothing but thoughts and fears, things that should have been ignored in the first place. But the more and more we engage with those thoughts and we reinforce them and we, come to think that they're actually something that we need to be afraid of and need to react to. And one of the things that I really want to talk about is this idea of the hero's journey format. And there's a real, popular kind of storytelling model called the hero's journey, and I'll link below to where you can learn more about that. But and because when I look at the OCD recovery process, having gone through it myself, and also having helped walk people through it as well, what I've learned is that OCD recovery really is a hero's journey, so to speak. And what I mean by that is that it's something that the individual has to go through. And there's certain parts of this process of the hero's journey that really parallel with the OCD recovery process as well. And to explain this a little better, I want to talk about this movie called Cars. It's a Pixar movie, right? And so for those of you who haven't seen it, I'll quickly kind of recap. The protagonist in the movie is a car named Lightning McQueen. He's a race car. And his whole journey starts, or the whole movie starts, with him, on this mission to win the Piston Cup, which is this big race, right? And he's kind of cocky, arrogant, and he's getting towed or on a trailer to the Piston Cup. Ends up, getting in this kind of wreck. He ends up ruining this town called Radiator Springs, and this whole kind of, story unfolds from there. Now, the parallel so far is that, one thing is on every hero's journey, there's always this idea of the reluctant hero, meaning that someone's usually called into the story, against their will. It's not something that they plan out. And you look at any good hero story, right? Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, or Frodo in The Lord of the Rings. It's something, the hero's journey is something that they get called into reluctantly. So initially there's this reluctance. And I say that because with OCD, no one asks for OCD. At least everyone I've ever talked to in my life that I've ever talked to with OCD never said to me like, I really wanted to get OCD, so I decided to do it. I've never heard that said. It's always something that, they just kind of showed up, so to speak. And in that same parallel of that hero's journey, when OCD shows up, there's always this reluctance to do the things we need to do to overcome it. And in every hero's journey, though, one of the greatest parts is there's this process where the hero is walking down the path and, gets met by a mentor or a guide, right? And in OCD treatment, just so you really understand the roles, as a treatment provider and a therapist, my job is to be the guide for someone else on their journey, right? So many, I find a lot of treatment providers like to position themselves like they're the hero and they're the one that's going to save you. And the reality is, though, with OCD, and as most challenges in life, is that you have the challenge, and by going through the challenge, that's what you're going to have to do the hard work. And I want to be very clear about that with people up front, because it is hard work and there is a lot of effort and struggle that's going to take place. And any therapist out there who really understands OCD knows that they are the one that has to really help guide their client or the person that's struggling, right? It's not their job to do the work for the client. And so when we talk about OCD and, ultimately that first section of the hero's journey, it really is about accepting that you have OCD, right? Accepting the challenge, and then and then having someone to guide and mentor you along the way to really show you the path that you're supposed to take. And then like any other great hero story, like you have to do the work of facing the abyss, right? And there's usually all this self-doubt. You look at any good hero's journey, any of the movies that you ever like, Cars or whatever, there's always this level of self-doubt. And to continue with this parallel of the movie Cars, in Radiator Springs, Lightning McQueen meets this car called the Hudson Hornet, who had already actually won the Piston Cup before and was this famous race car. And that race, and then Hudson Hornet actually taught Lightning McQueen these new skills that he had never learned. And so it was this idea of kind of drifting. So he had to turn left to turn right kind of thing, and learn to turn into the turns, so to speak. And the parallel is that those skills were completely against Lightning McQueen's instincts. And in the same exact way, on the OCD recovery process, the skills that you're gonna learn and start applying are gonna be completely against your instincts, and they're gonna sound almost foolish to a degree. But again, they're the skills that have been proven to work. When I talk about ERP and acceptance and commitment therapy and things like that. And so, and then what happens in Cars basically is Lightning McQueen ends up getting the Piston Cup, and he is going through the race, and at the very, very end of the race, he's about to win, right? And so initially, like I said, he started off with wanting to win the Piston Cup. And through the whole journey of going through the OCD treatment, the whole process of Radiator Springs and all that, this car crashes behind him, and Lightning McQueen stops right before the finish line, and he goes back and he pushes this car along to the finish line. Someone else wins, and Lightning McQueen ends up losing the race. And sorry if I'm spoiling the movie for those of you who haven't seen it. And the car that he's pushing across asks him, he's like, well, why'd you stop? You gave it up, and then you gave up the Piston Cup. And then he replies, he's like, oh, some grumpy old car told me it was just an empty cup, right? And at that point in the movie was the transformation that Lightning McQueen experienced from the journey. And he went from, his main goal of winning the cup to transforming into a new and better version of himself. And the parallel that I want to talk about there, and again, I could do a whole just segment on this, but is this idea of the transformation that takes place by going through this recovery process. You see, so many people when they start off on this treatment process are like, well, I want you to stop my thoughts and I want to never feel anxious again. The reality is that, as humans, we have thoughts we don't like, right? We have feelings that are uncomfortable, and that's okay, right? And the transformation of actually going through all this stuff of facing down your fears and applying all these new skills, what happens is that I almost always see some kind of transformation happen within the individual where they have more confidence to face down fear. They become more accepting of things that are uncomfortable. And there's this almost transformative process that takes place through the OCD recovery process. And so, when I talk about recovery from OCD, I'm not gonna lie to anyone and say, oh yeah, I can stop your thoughts, or I can, because recovery isn't this place that you reach. Recovery is this thing that you start practicing. Okay, and that really is the difference in understanding that of someone who's going to be successful. When someone thinks that there's this, mythological place that they're going to reach where their mind's just always in Zen and they've become enlightened, they're really setting themselves up for a lot of false expectations and failure along the way. And so when I talk about recovery from OCD, what I'm really talking about is learning these skills that you can practice to get you to a place where you can get out of that lens of OCD and stay out of that lens. And that's why when we understand that OCD is all about really changing our behaviors and not our thoughts, that first step right there is so crucial to the recovery process. And that's why things like ERP and acceptance and commitment therapy, which I'll talk about later in this training series, are so effective. So hopefully that analogy of that hero's journey is helpful. And again, with this training process or this series, I have several resources that I have available to help you continue on this journey. So if you check the notes below, I'll have links to different resources that you should definitely check out that will help you along this journey. And please be sure to like and subscribe to this as well. Share it if you know someone who will find it helpful. That'd be really helpful for me. And again, just thank you for being a part of this training. And then I'll meet you over in part 3 of this training, where I'm going to start going more into depth on the idea of different compulsions and all that stuff. So I'll see you over on part 3. And till next time, have a great day.